I think they have problems. The microphones sit relatively close to each other.
Sure.
And, start. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to this press briefing. We are going to have a short presentation here, and then me and my colleagues will speak shortly, and we have a Q&A afterwards. This is Jennifer Robinson, Julian Assange's lawyer, and Fidel Navarez, who was a consul in the Ecuadorian embassy until next year, right? Last year. And he's of course, knows the inside out of the Ecuadorian embassy and the situation and the condition that Julian Assange has been throughout the years. Now, let me just begin with telling you the basics. The new and unexpected thing that just came into light in the last few days is that Wikileaks uncovered an extensive spying operation against Julian Assange within the Ecuadorian embassy. It entails a total invasion of privacy of Mr. Assange, and what we have established is that security cameras were used to monitor his every move, his every meeting with visitors, and it included video recordings, photographs, and audio recordings from various recorders inside the embassy. It can be said that since Lenin Moreno took power, that Julian Assange has been living in a sort of a Truman Show-like situation inside the embassy. It has been a total invasion of his privacy. The material was stored and quite likely shared with the Trump administration. We know since January that there was a request by the US government to Ecuador to allow the interrogation of diplomats that worked in the Ecuadorian embassy in relation to an ongoing investigation, criminal investigation, into Wikileaks and Julian Assange. And we know that the Ecuadorian government did comply. We also know that there was a request to hand over visitors' logs from the embassy and video recordings from within the security cameras in the embassy. So we assume that this material, this extensive material that has been gathered, has been handed over to the Trump administration. As you know, the intelligence gathering by the United States has one purpose. It is to get Julian Assange extradited. We know that there is a secret indictment in place in the US. That was revealed late last year, and an extradition request awaits to be handed over to London at the moment Julian Assange steps out of the embassy and is arrested by the Metropolitan Police. And the Moreno government in Ecuador has been all too willing to help out by pushing Julian Assange out of the embassy. This attempt to have this done has been escalating in the last few weeks and even days. And even last week we heard that it was, from very reliable sources, on Friday that it was imminent that he would be evicted from the embassy and arrested on Lenin Moreno's order, the president of Ecuador. The only reason why this was averted, in our opinion, is the fact that we learned about it and we were able to publish that information. That was the only reason why that was stopped, probably temporarily. Now, to the strange story of how we basically found out, and this is the new thing that we are going to present to you today, that this extensive spying operation and a total invasion of privacy is going on inside the Ecuadorian embassy. It so happens that a few weeks ago we learned that some individuals in Spain were passing around the information that they had a massive trove of documents relating to Julian Assange from inside the embassy, and that it entailed audio, video, and photographs and documents. I was able to get a message through to one of the individuals, and I basically asked what documents they had for further description, and I got a email back from the individual, identifying himself as PM, where he said this material has a price. I was sent samples of what they had. It was photographs of Julian inside the embassy, visitors' logs, further photographs of meeting, and for some reason they found it important to send me a snapshot of a video camera from my own meeting with Julian Assange in the embassy in November last year. And these are, for some reason, they decided to blur out Julian's face in these photographs. Decided that this was a matter for the police as well. About 10 days ago, I traveled to Spain after the individuals had offered me to review the material and see what they had. I secretly recorded about a long meeting, 3-hour meeting, where I was going through hundreds of thousands of documents, basically, in 103 folders. And it was quite obvious that they had copies of videos of sensitive meetings. They had videos from the lobby of the entrance where visitors are coming. They had copies of passports, and they had all sorts of documents. This was truly a massive trove, all that had been collected by someone within the Ecuadorian embassy. And I'm just running this through to show you the scale of what they really had, and it was entailed pretty much everything on the life of Julian Assange inside the Ecuadorian embassy. When I mentioned the Truman Show situation in the beginning, that was no exaggeration. Thousands of photographs and documents and gigabytes after gigabytes of video material. What was of very serious concern to me was when I discovered that there was a copy of a legal note from Aitor Martinez, the lawyer of Julian Assange, which he had brought to the embassy for a specific purpose when he was assisting Julian when giving an affidavit or testimony to Quito in a lawsuit against the Ecuadorian government. So these are legal notes on Julian's strategy against the Ecuadorian embassy. And that had been copied. Aitor Martinez, well, we have one finger that I can point at. It's the only think we can actually say that, possibly point at who actually did the copying of this material. But this was definitely done within the embassy. Aitor just looked through his folder and sent me this photo, and he double-checked it. This is what he brought to the Ecuador embassy, and he recalls to have briefly left it unattended in the meeting room when Julian and he had to go to another meeting, another room to discuss the proceedings. Julian was giving evidence through video link. And that legal meeting between the lawyer, Aitor Martinez, and Julian was video recorded, as I found out as well, on a high-resolution camera that was installed and changed last year after LaVanguardia took office, and includes an audio recording device as well. This, of course, is of very grave, serious concern when legal meetings are being spied upon and legal documents are stolen. That is something that not even prisoners have to endure. Of further concern was a video that I saw from a visit by Dr. Ladbrokes, his doctor, which was video recorded in entirety when Dr. Ladbrokes was examining Julian, taking his blood pressure, and doing the usual medical exam that nobody expects is being recorded, stored, and found its way in the hands of some dubious individuals in Spain. The individuals reiterated that they thought that the price of €3 million was actually rather a good deal, because they had had offers of $9 million for various outlets for the entire material. Now, what we did was that we cooperated with the Spanish police, who set up a sting operation in Madrid last week. They did a wonderful job. They set up, put a team on that the project. Aitor Martinez, the lawyer in Madrid, went to the meeting wired, and they opened up a full investigation, and I'm referring to a special team that handles extortion with the Madrid police. Last week, this case, after initial gathering of material, was handed to a magistrate investigative judge who is now taken over the case and will proceed. It is now out of our hands. It is being handled as a serious extortion case and will finalize in the hands. And all information that you need about that case, I would have to refer to the Spanish police. Now, extortion is a very serious matter, but of much greater concern to me is this material gathering and spying on Julian Assange by the LaVanguardia government and the officials that work on his behalf in the embassy against an individual that was granted a diplomatic asylum and full protection by the Ecuadorian government. That is, in my opinion, not only illegal, but extremely unethical. And we all know from reports that this is all the work for one purpose: to service the U.S. government interests, who want to indict and imprison a publisher for the crime of publishing truthful material. So that is the story that I want to present to you to begin with. I think Jennifer now wants to maybe talk about the legal implication of this and other issues that have been sort of escalating in the last weeks or even days. Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone. We have long been concerned about the level of surveillance that Julian Assange is facing within the Ecuadorian embassy. The documents that you've seen today and the information that Wikileaks has gathered as a result of this Spanish criminal investigation into the extortion demonstrates just how much surveillance he is under, and indeed the breach of confidence, not just for Julian Assange, but for us as his lawyers, and for the doctors who have been seeking to provide him medical treatment within the embassy. This is a severe breach of lawyer-client-attorney privilege and fundamentally undermines our ability to properly defend and provide a defence to Julian Assange. As a result of this material, we will be renewing our applications to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights through our Spanish legal team, who have been working together with Wikileaks on the Spanish criminal investigation. We will also be making a fresh complaint to the UN Special Rapporteur on Privacy, who has agreement with the Ecuadorian government to visit Julian Assange on the 25th of April this month. And we will be using the material that we've gathered, including the pictures you saw, that were taken of my colleagues' legal files in relation to a case against Ecuador by Ecuadorian officials in that complaint. We remain concerned about the cooperation that Ecuador has provided the United States in their ongoing criminal investigation and prosecution of Julian Assange. We know since last November that there is a sealed indictment and that the US has made very plain its intention that prosecuting Julian Assange is a priority and that they will seek his extradition. No one can credibly deny that risk. That is the reason he sought asylum inside the Ecuadorian embassy, and it is the reason that he was granted asylum within the Ecuadorian embassy. Any suggestion that an assurance from the United Kingdom government that he would not be extradited to face the death penalty is insufficient to protect him from that risk to be sent to the United States. No democratic government ought to be cooperating with the request from a foreign state to seek the extradition of a publisher for publishing truthful information outside of its territory. This sets a dangerous precedent for the entire press here in the UK and elsewhere. There are significant questions to be asked of the British government in terms of its compliance with the United Nations ruling requesting and demanding that Julian Assange be permitted to leave the embassy, and indeed our recent win in the Freedom of Information Tribunal, which found that British police were cooperating with the US investigation into WikiLeaks journalists, including Kristen, for their activities here in the UK. These are serious questions that the British government ought to be asked. I'm going to hand over now, and we'll be happy to answer questions to Fidel.
Yes, Fidel, maybe you want to... Fidel, as I said, he knows the inside of the Ecuador embassy and can tell you about the situation as he sees it. Fidel.
Thank you, Christine. I want to thank you, WikiLeaks, for asking me to join today's presentation and to give my personal account of Julian's situation in my embassy. I just want to make clear that I speak on my behalf as Julian's friend and as an ex-Ecuadorian diplomat who was at the embassy from the very first day Julian came until July last year. That is more than 6 years, every day seeing Julian. I very much hope that what we are presenting today will be able to breach the shield that currently the Ecuadorian government has built in my country where, in my opinion, most of the Ecuadorian press is not doing what they should do, which is question the authorities, question the government, challenging them, because a lot of misinformation is on Julian's figure, on Julian's staying in the embassy, on Julian's asylum. One thing is absolutely clear. With the new government, Ecuador is not protecting Julian anymore. It's not protecting him as it should, since it granted him political asylum. Quite the contrary. The government is making everything possible to end the asylum. And the only reason why it hasn't happened yet, in my opinion, is because the international shame, the historic shame that will be entitled to Ecuador if it does so. So Julian's situation is more precarious than ever. Since March 2018, exactly 28th of March, Julian has been practically isolated. That is, without access to internet, without access to telephone communications, without access to visitors. That is a fact. It's not something subjective. It's a fact. I was there when Julian was officially told that by the instructions of the Ecuadorian government, he won't be allowed to have visitors except his lawyers. Let's remember that Julian Assange is not serving any sentence. He doesn't have any charges. He is a political refugee. Political refugees do not lose rights. On the contrary, they should have the rights protected. So regardless, beside the political controversies in Ecuador regarding the asylum, all of that, what we have here is a clearly human rights violation of a journalist. Not government should be able to impose or restrict in a journalist what he can say, what he cannot say, who he can meet, who he cannot meet. And that's exactly what's happening with Julian Assange. And he cannot defend himself. He cannot appear here online to speak his truth. Because anything he says, it will be taken as excuse for ending the asylum. So that's for me the more important thing. The government is clearly building a pretext, a case, to end the asylum. And what we see here, in my opinion, is the basis for that. This wouldn't be possible if it's not with the complicity of the government. In fact, I think this is happening by the instruction of the government. With the new government, a whole series of new cameras all over the place have been installed. There have always been cameras in the Ecuadorian embassy, of course. The Ecuadorian embassy is the most surveilled place on the planet. not just by Ecuador inside, but outside, cameras all over the place. But the cameras that have been used in the last year, they have the capacity to record audio. That is, every single meeting held by Julian Assange with his lawyers, with his doctors, not many visitors because he haven't had many visitors last year, are recorded. Tomorrow is scheduled a formal presentation by the Ecuadorian Foreign Affairs Minister at Parliament. And I think he's going to lie again to the Ecuadorian people, most likely with the complicity of the majority of the Ecuadorian press. In the last weeks, Julian Assange and Wikileaks have been accused of invading Mr. Moreno's privacy. Why is that? Because in the last months, there is a very serious corruption scandal in my country involving the president, his family, inner circle, that is being investigated by several Ecuadorian journalists. And that's embarrassing the president, who has said that his main asset is the fight against corruption. In order to distract the attention from the scandal, and in order to find the credible pretext to end the asylum of Julian Assange, the government has sold the idea that Julian Assange has hacked the president's phone. The very same guy who's isolated, without internet, without access to communications, and without any evidence, the Ecuadorian press buys that without doing the basic verification. Wikileaks has not published that. It's not a Wikileaks publication. So the pressure from the United States on Ecuador is high and increasing. Last year we had the visit of the Vice President Pence. That's the highest North American visit ever in Ecuadorian history. We know that there was a discussion about Julian Assange. We know that he came with several letters from American congressmen requesting that Julian should be expelled from the embassy. We know that the new appointed North American ambassador has told the Congress that Julian Assange will be one of his main issues to deal with Ecuador. So I think the fate of Julian is pending on international solidarity, basically. That will perhaps make Mr. Moreno, who has in his power the destiny of Julian Assange. In a presidential model government state as Ecuador, international policy is run by the president. It's in his decision. And the protection of Julian Assange is a state decision. It shouldn't be a government. It should be respected. Political asylum is not a contract between two parties that decide on special conditions and bargaining conditions in order to be respected. Political asylum is a human rights international institution. And Ecuador will be breaching all international legislation on political asylum if it hands over Julian Assange. And it will be the worst possible precedent for freedom of expression and for journalism around the world.
Thank you very much, Fidel. And before I open to Q&A, I just want to make it absolutely clear. He mentioned totally absurd accusations that have come from the highest officials in Ecuador, even the president himself, that WikiLeaks or Julian Assange had in some manner had anything to do with the exposure of material that had to do with a corruption scandal that seems to be brewing around President Moreno. And I basically want to say that here, as the editor of WikiLeaks, that the organization had nothing whatsoever to do with it, and it's absurd to maintain that, as Fidel immediately explained. Now, do you want to add something, Jen, or shall we go to questions?
Yeah, I have questions. My name is Dr. Rosenberg, and I have a question. First of all, on the question of asylum. If Ecuador granted asylum, surely Ecuador is fully entitled to withdraw asylum whenever it wishes to. On the question of the surveillance, as you say, you knew perfectly well that there were cameras there. Isn't it a bit ironic that you're complaining about surveillance within the embassy? Surely Ecuador is fully entitled to have cameras within its own embassy, and it's a bit ironic you're complaining about leaks. And as for the point about his rights, surely the answer is in Julian Assange's own hands. All he has to do is walk out of the embassy, and he will no longer be under surveillance from.
Well, there were some questions in between the surelys. Do you want to start, Jen?
Sure. First, as to the issue of asylum and withdrawing asylum, there is a decision of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights which came down last year, which set certain conditions upon which Ecuador could withdraw asylum, and that requires that Ecuador ensure that certain conditions are met around protecting the very basis upon which the asylum was granted, which includes the risk of returning the person to the risk of persecution, which would be, in this instance, extraditing him to the United States. So there are certain conditions that Ecuador must meet in terms of assuring, in this instance and in this case, that that would not happen. As to the point about surveillance within the embassy, yes, of course, we know that there is surveillance within the embassy, but Joshua, you of all people know the importance of legal privilege and legal professional privilege. And spying upon the meetings of lawyers, taking photographs of lawyers' notes, is a severe breach of lawyer-attorney-client privilege, and one that should not be tolerated in any context.
And may I add, surely if I visit your home and I see a shotgun on above the fireplace, I can assume that you will use it against me. Fidel, anything to add?
Not much to add. There's supreme principle in political asylum and refugee, which is the no refoulement principle, which forbids the handing over of a refugee to their persecutors, if the risk of the life of the human rights of the person protected persists, which in this case is very evident and obvious.
There's a question over there.
Yeah, I mean, as you well know, all embassies are about spying. You yourself described this embassy as the most surveilled building on earth. You're not a little naive. Why didn't you take steps to counter what was obviously going to happen, that this man was beyond the audio and visual surveillance? I mean, it's frankly no good hiding behind niceties like client confidentiality and medical confidentiality. Spying is the exact opposite about that. That is the reality of spying. You had to have known that.
Well, I mean, the when we talk about the most surveilled embassy, I mean, we're talking about the outside as well, where the Metropolitan Police has spent, tens of millions, I think, of pounds surveying the embassy on the outside. In addition, of course, this increased effort by Elaine Renner started to escalate last year. Most of the material that I saw was from last year, after the new cameras with audio equipment was being added or upscaled with higher resolution cameras and audio recorders. Of course, there has been attempt to take steps to bypass the surveillance. It is full knowledge. I can tell this here, that when I meet Julian Assange, he takes a radio inside the meeting room and turns up the volume. We're basically sitting whispering in each other's ears. Is that something that you find attainable? We're talking about conditions that are worse than any prisoner has to endure. And when it entails spying on legal meetings, which should be privileged, everybody agrees on that. And doctors' visit, everybody agrees that should be private. There is some sense of decency that you expect. And when you're implying that this is just normal spying operations on legal meetings, on doctors' visit, I don't agree to that. And we're drawing a picture here of the situation that he has to endure inside the embassy, and that has to come to an end.
Okay, can I just, because I don't think you answered Julie Joshua's question moments ago, there is an undeniable irony about Wikileaks of all people complaining about material being leaked. Julian Assange was noted for not having too many considerations about what should and shouldn't be published. Now, when you get stung by the same thing, you're upset about it.
No, I don't see any irony in that. Because as Fiddle says, the entire purpose of this gathering of information is to push him out of the embassy. That is quite obvious with the escalation of the material. And
it doesn't matter about the purpose of it. You can't be a la carte about what is published. Or WikiLeaks, you can't complain when the same...
I'm complaining about the gathering of the material, and I am complaining about the use of the material to try to extort the organization for millions of euros. If you want to have any questions about whether this is an embarrassing material, I can answer it, yes, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to Ecuador.
If you're saying that he is being treated worse than he was in prison, what's the logical reason for staying in the embassy? Why not surrender to the legal process then? If you could get better conditions inside prison, if you would have client confidentiality, if you would have medical confidentiality, you would have all these things.
Well, when I was talking about prisons, I was referring to normal prison circumstances. We all know that what he is basically trying to avert is being extradited to the United States. And we have no idea what kind of prison condition he would have to endure there. We have precedents where we have seen people being locked up in confinement 23 hours of 24 hours a day for months on end.
Well, we haven't seen video surveillance ever released on the internet, for example. So he would have privacy, which is what he's complaining about now. It's like privacy.
I don't get your point. So I mean, he should walk out of the embassy because of the situation there and voluntarily be extradited to the United States for the prosecution of being a publisher and an editor of a journalistic organization.
Is there a scenario which he or you would like to now move forward to resolve this impasse? Because it seems that trust between Julian and his hosts has completely broken down. So would he intend to stay there in the long run, or can you sketch out the scenario which, in his mind, you would like to go forward?
I would want to see him walk out there a free man. And at least I wanted to see a assurance by the UK government that he would not be extradited to the United States. That is what he has been fighting against all these years.
Can I just ask Mr. Robinson, could you please elaborate a little bit more on the legal steps you're going to take, and For you, one question. You complained a little bit about Donald Trump. Does Wikileaks regret having helped Donald Trump get elected by publishing material from Russia?
Do you want to start?
In terms of the legal steps that we will be taking, as I mentioned, we'll be renewing our application to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in relation to the ongoing surveillance and breach of his privacy. We're also very concerned about the risk that he may well be expelled from the embassy at any time. That is a risk that we take very seriously, and we're putting in place contingencies here in the event that that does happen. We're also making a complaint to the UN Special Rapporteur on Privacy, who has the agreement of Ecuador to come to visit the embassy later this month. And we understand that the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture is also considering and is interested in taking up the case as a result of the permanent impact upon Julian's health as a result of being in the embassy for so long. We're also obviously remain concerned about the ongoing US criminal investigation, and will continue to reach out through our US co-counsel to seek a resolution of that matter in the United States, because we do not want to see him facing extradition.
Fidel, the asylum condition or terms?
Yeah. As I said, political asylum is not a particular contract between two parties. It's a universal human rights instrument. In Latin America, there are several treaties on political asylum, diplomatic asylum, territorial asylum. None of them forbid the asylee of public opinion the president somehow wants to say that a political asylee should not give political opinions, should not interfere with the international policy of Ecuador or friendly countries, which is absolutely no sense, because freedom of expression, freedom of opinion is a basic human right. No treaty should forbid that right. So Moreno might be referring to special conditions imposed of Julian in what they call a protocol of conduct imposed by Ecuador from last October, when they wanted to lift the total isolation of visitors and communications. The protocol has draconian conditions on the political asylee. As I said, the government has taken the right to decide what he can say, what he can't, who he can meet, who he can't. The visitors that came to the embassy are subjected to unacceptable requirements, like handing the Ecuadorian embassy the very personal information about social networks, ID of the telephones, etc., that the Ecuador government is keen in sharing with third parties. So if you come to visit Julian Assange, if your visit is accepted, and for some reason you take your phone with you without declaring that will be a breach of the asylum conditions, which is absolutely no sense.
Can I ask a couple of questions on the threat of eviction? Can you clarify if there is a link between the fact that you found a spying operation and the threat of eviction? And secondly, you said that the threat of eviction was imminent. What evidence do you have for that?
Yeah. I just want to finish the third part of the question there. You said, do we regret helping Donald Trump get elected? I'm getting rather sick and tired of that. I mean, I'm sitting in a room full of journalists. Any news organization, any publishing organization works. it's a simple basic rule that you work by. If a material is newsworthy and if it's truthful and if it's in the public interest to publish it, you publish it. You don't have a choice to actually say, no, we're not going to publish it. You have a duty to publish it. I hope all of you agree in here. If not, you don't. If it's newsworthy, if it's in the public interest, and if it's truthful. Do you want to choose then to publish or not?
No, but there are laws in this country which restrict information and which we as professional journalists sometimes choose to comply with.
At which there's no public interest defence.
So what laws did WikiLeaks break?
For example, libel, there are all sorts of laws.
Yeah, what laws did WikiLeaks break?
I'm not going to get into that discussion.
No, let's start starting a debate here in the room.
I'm not going to be lectured by you as to how I, as a journalist, do my job. You say what you want to do, I will do what I want to do. We ask the questions. This is a press conference. You answer.
Well, I am answering the question, and I'm referring to what I believe is a sacred duty of journalists. All right? Sorry, I lost the thread, and I didn't hear the first part of the question.
Could you clarify if
Yeah.
there's a link between the fact that you found the spying operation and then the threat of Mr. Assange's eviction? And secondly, you said earlier that the threat of eviction was imminent. What evidence do you have for that claim?
If I understand your question correctly, I don't believe that this material sort of showing up has a connection to the escalation of the threat of eviction by Julian. I don't have any basis of that. On Friday, we had high-level sources confirming that high-level Ecuadorian sources confirming that the eviction was imminent within hours or days as it was presented to us. Okay, I think we have, do you want to add something? I think we have a room for a couple of more questions before we finish. Yes, go ahead, ladies.
Speaking about Ecuador, the allegations of Julian violating the protocol, the Foreign Affairs Minister has said in the last 2 days that they have the right to investigate Assange for violation of privacy. He has violated the protocol several times, and he's actually going to Parliament, tomorrow, to inform MPs about the case and the protocol, and if Julian has violated this protocol. A, have you been notified officially that he has violated the protocol? And B, do you think this is a way to escalate the case in order to evict him? If you have a high-level source that says they want to do this in the next few years?
I mean, it's definitely used as a pretext, as Peter explained very well before, to evict him from the embassy, and I question the validity of unilaterally imposing something of asylum terms years and years after asylum is granted. That simply, I don't think that has any basis in international law. Is that correct, Jan?
Well, I also just want to add that Ecuador's ability to resolve this case is fundamentally dependent upon the British government's willingness to act in this case. We have been seeking assurances about the risk of extradition to the United States for many years, since before he went inside the Ecuadorian embassy. And indeed, the UN ruling from the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention made clear that the obligations to resolve this case lie with the United Kingdom government as much as Ecuador and any other state. So I really think that it's important that we're asking questions of the British government and the British government's willingness to take the political steps that are necessary to ensure that Ecuador can bring this case to an end.
But have you legal team been notified about any violation of the protocol at this moment?
The protocol inside the embassy is inherently arbitrary and continues to change. We've asked Ecuador to provide us with a written copy of it to ensure that there is fairness and to ensure that Julian can comply with whatever the rules are. We think that there is significant difficulties with the protocol, and we have asked Ecuador to provide us with a copy so that we can ensure that we're following those rules and that we have a clear list of those rules.
Oh, in the back, please, to the lady in the back, please.
How much of this has to do with the publication of detailed
Not to my knowledge, and I don't see a link there.
Can you confirm or deny on the record whether or not Julian Assange has been approached by the Special Counsel?
Our US counsel has made clear that we have not been approached by the Mueller inquiry at any point.
You were first.
Yes, could you go into a bit more detail about what you know about the link between this information being gathered within the embassy, clearly by officials, as you said, and it turning up in Spain? How on earth did that happen? Do you suspect a deliberate involvement by Ecuador? What do you know of how the information got from the cameras to Spain?
I don't know very much about that, and I assume that that will be a part of the investigation by the Spanish police authorities and by his Spanish lawyers. They would demand information. However, we do have more material from that we recorded, or I recorded in Spain, and it will possibly cast more light on that chain, how it ended up in Spain, and we will put it online and make it available shortly.
But you can't say anything about it now?
It would be speculative, and I don't want to speculate about how it came about.
My question was similar, but you've met with these guys. Is there anything you can tell us about them? They're in Spain. Are they Spanish? Are they Ecuadorian? What did they want? I mean, obviously they wanted money, but what were they telling you about how they received this information?
They didn't really disclose a lot, but some. But as I said, we will release that a little bit later. I assume I met 4 individuals. I know the ID of one of the person, and I am told that that person who is the ringleader has a prior conviction on similar charges. But that should be confirmed through Spain. I am pretty sure that the authorities there will release some information on the investigation shortly. But of course, no, they did not reveal a lot about the origin of the material. There were Spanish speakers. I went there with a translator as well, and there is a possibility that at least one person was not Spanish but Spanish speaking.
Are you aware of anyone else who might have this information? Do they have kind of dead man's drop or something to make it more widely available? And also, how much of this information that was gathered in this trove will Wikileaks be making public?
Well, I mean, I showed you basically what I had with the samples that were sent, so that's making it public. And I was shown just information on a computer. I was able to grab a bit of the screens with a hidden camera, which I took to the meeting, just to give you a sense of what it entails. So that's basically for you here. Does that answer your question? So is there one more last question in the back there?
Yes, I understand. I think you said that the Ecuadorian president has alleged that Julian Assange has hacked his phone from inside the embassy, which seems very unlikely. Is the material that emerged that he's been accused of hacking, does it have any relation to prior releases by Wikileaks? And if so, what is that information generally by the Commission?
I'm not. I don't know the nature of that information. If you're referring to the INA papers, but I was simply saying categorically this was not a work by Wikileaks, and it was published by someone else. So the claim that is made that this is somehow the work of Wikileaks or Julian Assange is I totally deny that, and it's absurd.
I'm just going to ask a quite useful forward, which is absolutely clarifying. You're connecting this, you think, to actions by the US government, but you really admit that you haven't got any hard evidence of that. That is speculative at the moment.
You mean the intelligence gathering inside the embassy?
Yeah.
I think it's a part of an escalating attempt to evict him of the embassy, with the end result of having him extradited to the United States. I think it doesn't take. I mean, if you connect the dots, it's pretty easy to draw that picture. Sorry.
You don't have any evidence.
What evidence do you need? I mean, if it walks like a duck, if it talks like a duck. I mean, the New York Times did report several weeks ago that there had been a secret meeting between Lenin Moreno and a representative of the Trump government, where Moreno had offered to hand over Julian Assange to the United States in exchange for debt relief or an IMF favor of some kind.
I just want to nail down, you do not have any hard evidence to us today of US involvement. You are supposing that to be the case.
Of a US involvement in setting up the security cameras in the embassy or gathering material.
Yeah.
What kind of proof were you then?
I'm asking questions here. I'm just trying to get it nailed down. You do not have any hard evidence of that to give us today, do you? It's yes or no? I mean, you'd have done it by now.
Well, we know that there's been a request for this material. We know that there was a request for.
My question is clearly no, isn't it? You don't have any evidence
that this material was handed over to officials in the United States. Well, no, but I do. We do know that there has been a request of assistance. There will be of interrogation of diplomats in the Ecuadorian embassy, and there was a request to hand over material of this nature.
Indeed,
and we know of the compliance that the Lenin Moreno government has been showing. All right. Okay, I think
just on the last point.
One more question.
The Department of Justice of the United States requested the Ecuadorian government for judicial cooperation on the investigation of Julian Assange. As part of that, the Ecuadorian government accepted the humiliation of its diplomats and civil servants that work at the Ecuadorian embassy. No less than 12 to 15 people, including ex-ambassadors, were interrogated by North American prosecutors in Ecuador and online in London. I myself was requested for a testimony. And of course, I completely refuse it because it's humiliating. Nobody can even imagine if an Ecuadorian prosecutor requests the United States to submit American diplomats to be interrogated by an Ecuadorian prosecutor over a political refugee that has the protection of that country. That is, for me, the best evidence of the collaboration between the current government and the United States in order to hand Julian Assange over them.
Well, that has to be a short question.
What was the reaction by the Ecuadorian embassy when you gave them this information? Have they denied it? Have they fired anyone? Have they done any investigations? Have they taken down the cameras? What have they done?
The information that I presented here. They haven't been told that they probably learn after this meeting about the material. Well, we have to come.
Practical question. The material that you were showing there,
yeah.
Are you putting that online for us to access, or do we all have to come back and fill in the screen if you go through the presentation again?
No, I'll try to put the thing online. Okay. Well, thank you for coming. We are a little bit over time here, and thanks for your interest. To conclude, thank you.
Just clarify one thing quickly. The Spanish police, apologies, I was filing at the same time as listening, so I may have missed this, but Spanish police, have they made arrests or are they